You won't believe what happened when an entitled rich kid thought he could intimidate me off my own property. Picture this. I'm quietly tending to my horses on my own ranch when some arrogant college brat shows up demanding I leave for his party. Little did he know he was messing with the wrong person, the county sheriff. But that's just the beginning of this wild story that'll make your jaw drop. Buckle up, because this tale of instant karma and sweet justice is about to blow your mind. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been the sheriff of Cedar Valley County for the past 12 years. When I'm not keeping the peace, I live on a beautiful 40-acre ranch that's been in my family for 3 generations. It's my sanctuary, my pride and joy, and the place where I go to decompress after dealing with the chaos of law enforcement. The ranch sits on a hilltop overlooking the valley, complete with restored 1920s farmhouse, stables for my 4 horses, and rolling pastures that stretch as far as the eye can see. It's peaceful, private, and exactly 1 mile outside the Cedar Valley Heights HOA jurisdiction, a fact that becomes crucial to this story. On this particular Saturday afternoon in late September, I was in my civilian clothes, worn jeans, a faded flannel shirt, and my grandfather's old cowboy hat, working on repairing a section of fence that my mare, Buttercup, had damaged during one of her adventurous escapes. The weather was perfect, with that crisp autumn air that makes you grateful to be alive. I was hammering in a new fence post when I heard the rumble of expensive engines coming up my private dirt road. 3 vehicles appeared to the dust cloud. A shiny black Mercedes SUV, a cherry red BMW convertible, and a massive lifted truck with chrome everything. The convoy looked completely out of place on my rustic property. The vehicles parked right in front of my gate, and out stepped about a dozen young people, all clearly college age and dressed like they were heading to some upscale party. But the one who caught my attention was a tall, lanky kid with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes who seemed to be leading the group. This was Brandon Whitmore. Though I didn't know his name yet, he strutted over to my fence with the kind of confidence that only comes from never being told no in your entire life. His entourage followed behind him like a pack of well-dressed wolves. "Hey there, old man," Brandon called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "You need to pack up your little farm operation here and clear out. We're having a party tonight, and we don't want any yokels cluttering up the scenery." I stopped hammering and turned to face him, keeping my expression neutral. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Brandon continued, pulling out his phone to check it dismissively. "My mother owns the HOA around here, and we're throwing a massive party for my fraternity brothers. This whole area needs to be cleared of any undesirable elements." He gestured vaguely at my property, my horses, and me with obvious disgust. One of his friends, a stocky guy with backwards baseball cap, chimed in, "Yeah, dude, we're talking about a $1,000 plate charity event. You and your barnyard animals are going to kill the vibe." I set down my hammer and walked close to the fence, studying these entitled young people with growing amusement. "And who exactly are you?" Brandon puffed out his chest like a peacock. "I'm Brandon Whitmore. My mother is Margaret Whitmore, president of the Cedar Valley Heights HOA. She basically runs this entire county." He said this with a kind of pride that made me want to laugh out loud. "Is that so?" I replied, crossing my arms. "And what makes you think you have any authority over my property?" "Listen, Gramps," Brandon said, his voice getting more aggressive. "I don't have time to explain property law to some hillbilly. The point is, important people are coming to this party tonight. State senators, judges, business executives. They don't want to look out at some ramshackle farm with horses taking dumps in the field." His girlfriend, a blonde in a pink dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, giggled and added, "It's like totally gross. Can't you just go stay at a motel or something?" I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "This is my property. I own it. I've lived here for 15 years, and my family has owned this land for over 60 years. Brandon rolled his eyes dramatically. "Look, I don't care about your sob story. My mom's HOA has ways of dealing with problem properties. We can make your life very difficult if you don't cooperate." "Oh, really?" I said, genuinely curious now. "And how exactly would you do that?" "Code violations, noise complaints, property disputes. We got connections with the county sheriff's department. One phone call from my mother, and you'll have cops crawling all over this place looking for any excuse to shut you down. The irony was so thick, I could cut it with a knife. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Instead, I decided to play along and see just how far this entitled brat would push things. That sounds serious, I said, trying to look worried. I wouldn't want any trouble with the law. Brandon's chest puffed up even more. Exactly. Now you're getting it. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to load up your animals, pack a bag, and get out of here for the weekend. We'll make sure your property doesn't get damaged, and everyone wins. And if I refuse? Brandon's smile turned nasty. Then you're going to find out why nobody messes with the Whitmore family. Brandon's confidence was growing by the minute, and his entourage was feeding off his energy. They started spreading out along my fence line, some taking pictures and videos with their phones, others making loud comments about my property that were clearly designed to provoke me. "This place is such a dump," one girl said loudly. "Like, how do people even live like this? I bet it smells like manure everywhere," another added, holding her nose dramatically. But Brandon wasn't done with his threats. He pulled out his phone and made a big show of scrolling through his contacts. "You know what? I'm going to call my mother right now. She'll have the sheriff here in 20 minutes to escort you off this property." "On what grounds?" I asked, genuinely curious about what story he'd concoct. "Trespassing, public nuisance, violating county health codes." "Take your pick," Brandon said smugly. "My mother knows all the right people. The sheriff is basically on our payroll." I had to work hard to keep a straight face. Sheriff Jake Morrison on the Whitmore family payroll? That was news to me. Brandon dialed a number and put the phone to his ear. "Mom? Yeah, it's me. We've got a situation up here." "No. The party setup is fine, but there's this old guy with a farm right in the middle of everything, and he's refusing to leave." "I know, right? Can you call Sheriff Morrison and have him come up here?" I watched this performance with growing amusement. Margaret Whitmore was indeed the HOA president, and she was indeed a pain in my professional life. I dealt with her numerous times over the years. Noise complaint about her neighbors, demands for special treatment, and her general belief that being HOA president made her some kind of local royalty. But what Brandon didn't know was that Margaret and I had a very clear understanding. She stayed in her lane, and I stayed in mine. More importantly, my property was outside her jurisdiction, and she knew it. Brandon hung up the phone with a satisfied smirk. "Good news, old man. Sheriff Morrison is on his way. My mom says he's very cooperative when it comes to dealing with problem citizens." "Problem citizens?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "People who don't know their place," Brandon clarified. "People who think they can interfere with important community events just because they've got some piece of paper saying they own land." His girlfriend clapped her hands excitedly. "Oh my God, this is going to be so cool. I've never seen someone get arrested before." One of Brandon's fraternity brothers, a guy with a ridiculous man bun and a shirt that probably cost more than my truck, stepped forward. "Dude, you should just take the hint and leave. When the sheriff gets here, this is going to get ugly for you." I leaned against my fence post. The picture of calm. "And what makes you think the sheriff will take your side?" "Because," Brandon said, as if explaining something to a child, "my family donates thousands of dollars to the sheriff's department every year. We fund their equipment, their training, their community programs. Sheriff Morrison knows which side his bread is buttered on." This was getting better and better. The truth was, the Whitmore family had never donated a single penny to the sheriff's department, but they had complained about my department plenty of times, usually when we didn't respond to their petty HOA disputes the way they wanted. "You seem pretty confident about that," I observed. "Confidence comes from power," Brandon said, quoting something he'd probably heard in a business class. "And power comes from knowing the right people." About 10 minutes later, I heard the rumble of a diesel engine coming up the road. Brandon's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Here comes the cavalry," he announced to his friends. "This is about to get very interesting." A county sheriff's vehicle appeared through the dust, and I had to smile. It was Deputy Rodriguez, one of my most reliable officers. Maria had been with the department for 8 years, and she was tough as nails and twice as smart. The patrol car pulled up behind Brandon's convoy, and Deputy Rodriguez stepped out. She was in full uniform, her badge gleaming in the afternoon sun, and she carried herself with the authority that comes from years of dealing with difficult people. Brandon immediately rushed over to her, his entourage trailing behind. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man is trespassing on HOA property and refusing to leave. We need him removed immediately." Deputy Rodriguez looked at Brandon with the kind of expression she usually reserved for drunk college kids at traffic stops. "And you are?" "Brandon Whitmore. My mother is Margaret Whitmore, president of the Cedar Valley Heights HOA. She called Sheriff Morrison about the situation." Rodriguez nodded slowly, then looked past Brandon to where I was standing by my fence. Our eyes met, and I saw the moment of recognition, followed immediately by what looked like barely suppressed laughter. "I see," she said carefully. "And what exactly is the problem here?" Brandon launched into his story, complete with wild gestures and dramatic emphasis. He painted me as some kind of squatter who was interfering with an important community event, someone who needed to be taught a lesson about respecting authority. Rodriguez listened patiently, taking notes in her little notebook. When Brandon finished his rant, she looked up at him with perfect professional neutrality. "So, let me get this straight," she said. "You want me to remove this man from his own property? Well, I mean, he claims it's his property, but—" "No," Rodriguez interrupted. "I mean his actual, legally owned property. The property he's owned for 15 years. The property that's clearly marked with posted signs and is completely outside the HOA's jurisdiction." Brandon's confident expression started to waver. "What do you mean, outside the jurisdiction?" Deputy Rodriguez pulled out her phone and showed Brandon something on the screen. "This is a county property map. See this line here? That's the boundary of the Cedar Valley Heights HOA. And see this property here?" She pointed to a clearly marked area. "That's Mr. Morrison's ranch. As you can see, it's completely outside your mother's HOA jurisdiction." Brandon's face went through several interesting color changes as he stared at the screen. That can't be right. My mother said she had authority over this whole area." "Your mother has authority over properties within the HOA boundaries," Rodriguez explained patiently. "This isn't one of them. This is private property, legally owned, and the owner has every right to be here. But the party," Brandon started, "the party that you're planning to hold on HOA common areas?" Rodriguez interrupted. "That's fine, as long as you have the proper permits and stay within the noise ordinances. But you have no legal right to demand that this property owner leave his own land." I decided it was time to join the conversation. I walked over the fence, close enough to hear everything, but still on my own property. "Is there a problem here, Deputy?" I asked, playing my role perfectly. Rodriguez turned to me with a perfectly straight face. "No, sir, Mr. Morrison. Just a misunderstanding about property boundaries and jurisdiction." Brandon's head snapped back and forth between Rodriguez and me. "Morrison? Did you say Morrison?" "That's right," Rodriguez confirmed. "This is Jake Morrison. He owns this property." I could see the wheels turning in Brandon's head, but he hadn't quite put it together yet. But the sheriff's name is Morrison, too. That's just a coincidence, right?" Rodriguez and I exchanged a look that lasted about 3 seconds longer than it should have. "What do you think?" she asked Brandon. The realization hit Brandon like a freight train. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. You're not." "Sheriff Jake Morrison," I confirmed, extended my hand with a friendly smile. "Nice to meet you, Brandon. I believe you have some interesting theories about my department being on your family's payroll." Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. His entourage, sensing that something had gone very wrong, started backing away from him. "Oh shit," muttered Man Bun Guy. "Dude, you just tried to get the sheriff arrested by the sheriff." Brandon's girlfriend was furiously whispering to her friends, and I caught fragments like "so embarrassing" and "I can't be seen with him." "Now then," I continued, my voice taking on the authoritative tone I used during official business, "let's talk about what's really happening here. You came onto my property, not HOA property, but my private property, and demanded that I leave. You made threats about having me arrested on false charges. You claimed that my department was corrupt and that your family had undue influence over law enforcement. Brandon tried to speak, but no words came out. Furthermore, I continued. You've been making harassing comments about my property, taking unauthorized photos, and generally behaving in a way that could be considered trespassing, harassment, and possibly even attempted extortion. I didn't know. Brandon finally managed to stammer. Didn't know what? That you can't order people off their own property? That lying to police officers is a crime? That claiming to have corrupt influence over law enforcement is a serious accusation. Deputy Rodriguez stepped forward. Should I start taking statements, Sheriff? I pretended to consider this. Well, that depends. Mr. Whitmore, are you planning to continue this harassment, or are you going to apologize and leave my property? Brandon looked around at his friends, who were all studiously avoiding eye contact. His girlfriend had actually started walking back toward the cars. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't know you were. You didn't know I was what? A human being with rights? A property owner? Someone who deserves basic respect. I'm sorry, he repeated, louder this time. I was completely wrong. I'll leave right now. But I wasn't quite done. Hold on there, son. We need to talk about this party of yours. Brandon's face went even paler. The party? The party you're planning to hold tonight. Do you have the proper permits for a large gathering? Have you filed for a noise variance? Do you have adequate parking and sanitation facilities for the number of guests you're expecting? My mother handled all that stuff. Did she now? I pulled out my own phone and made a show of checking something, because according to my records, no permits have been filed for any large gatherings in the Cedar Valley Heights area this weekend. This was actually true. I checked that morning when I heard rumors about some big party being planned. The Whitmores had a history of throwing large events without proper permits, assuming that their HOA status exempted them from county regulations. Oh no, Brandon whispered. This is going to kill my mother. Your mother isn't my concern right now. I said, my concern is making sure that any large gathering in my county is properly permitted and won't endanger public safety. Deputy Rodriguez stepped forward again. Sheriff, should I start issuing citations for the unpermitted gathering? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, I said, though I was enjoying watching Brandon sweat. Mr. Whitmore, how many people are you expecting at this party? About 200. Brandon admitted reluctantly. 200 people and no permits. That's a serious violation of county ordinances. The fines alone could run into the thousands. Brandon looked like he was about to faint. Please, Sheriff Morrison, I'm really sorry about earlier. I was completely out of line. Is there any way we can work something out? I stroked my chin thoughtfully. Well, I suppose I could call the county offices and see if they're willing to process an emergency permit application. But it would have to be filed immediately, and you'd have to pay the expedited processing fees. Yes, absolutely. Whatever it costs. And, I continued, you'd have to agree to certain conditions. Security personnel, noise monitoring, designated parking areas, and a firm end time of midnight. Done. Whatever you want. And, I said, saving the best for last, you'd have to publicly apologize to me in front of all your party guests for your behavior today. Brandon's face went through another series of color changes. In front of everyone? Everyone. I want you to explain to your guests that you learned an important lesson today about respecting other people's property and rights. Brandon looked around at his friends, who were all watching with expressions ranging from amusement to secondhand embarrassment. I guess I don't have much choice. No, I agreed. You don't. Margaret Whitmore's confident demeanor began to crack as Deputy Rodriguez, and I explained the situation to her. The unauthorized party permits, the questionable charity fundraising, and her son's behavior toward me were all laid out in detail. "Now, wait just a minute," Margaret said, her voice rising. "I've been planning community events for 20 years. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I don't appreciate being lectured by—" She stopped mid-sentence when she realized she was about to lecture the county sheriff about law enforcement. "You don't appreciate being lectured by whom, Mrs. Whitmore?" I asked calmly. I just meant that this is all a simple misunderstanding. The charity registration is handled through the college, and I'm sure all the paperwork is in order." "Really?" "Because when Deputy Rodriguez called the college 20 minutes ago, they said they have no record of any charity fundraising event involving your son's fraternity." Margaret's face went pale. "That's impossible. I spoke with the dean myself." "Which dean?" Rodriguez asked, pulling out her notebook. "Dean Thompson, in the business school." Rodriguez made a note. "I'll be sure to follow up with Dean Thompson. What's his first name?" His first name is—" Margaret looked around desperately. Robert Thompson." "There is no Robert Thompson in the business school administration," Rodriguez said, consulting her phone. "I just checked their website." Margaret's composure was cracking visibly now. "Well, maybe I got the name wrong. I spoke with someone and they approved everything." "Mrs. Whitmore," I said, stepping forward, "I think we need to have a very honest conversation about what's really happening here." "I don't know what you mean." "I mean that your son has been collecting money for what he's advertising as a charity event, but the money is actually going to fund private parties for his fraternity. That's fraud, Mrs. Whitmore." "It's not fraud," Margaret snapped, her carefully maintained facade finally cracking. "These are networking events. They're educational. Educational parties where college students get drunk and network with business professionals. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds inappropriate, but—" "It sounds inappropriate because it is inappropriate," I interrupted, "but that's not even the biggest problem here." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean that your son came onto my property today and tried to force me to leave at gunpoint." "At gunpoint?" Margaret and Brandon both said simultaneously. "Not literally at gunpoint," I clarified, "but he threatened to have me arrested on false charges if I didn't comply with his demands. That's called extortion, Mrs. Whitmore." "Now see here," Margaret said, her voice taking on the imperious tone she probably used during HOA meetings. "My son may have been overzealous, but he was just trying to ensure that tonight's event goes smoothly. Important people are coming, and appearances matter." "Important people like who?" "State legislators, judges, business leaders. People who contribute significantly to this community. And you think these important people will want to be associated with a fraudulent charity scheme?" Margaret's face turned red. "It's not fraudulent, and I don't appreciate your tone, Sheriff Morrison. I've been a pillar of this community for 20 years, and I've never had my integrity questioned like this." "Your integrity?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Let's talk about your integrity, Mrs. Whitmore. How many times have you filed false noise complaints against your neighbors? How many times have you tried to use your HOA position to intimidate people into compliance? How many times have you claimed to have influence over my department that you don't actually have?" Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I don't know what you're talking about." "Really? Because I have a file on you, Mrs. Whitmore. A thick file. Would you like me to read from it?" "You have a file on me?" "I have files on all the frequent complainers in my county. It helps me track patterns of harassment and abuse of the emergency services system." Deputy Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sheriff, should I get the files in the car?" "That won't be necessary," I said, though I was enjoying the effect this was having on Margaret. "Mrs. Whitmore, here's what's going to happen. First, this party is not happening tonight unless you can produce valid permits, proof of charitable registration, and security personnel to ensure public safety. But we've already spent thousands of dollars on food and decorations. That's your problem, not mine. Second, Your son is going to return all the money he's collected under false pretenses. It's not false pretenses. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm trying to help you here. Right now, this is a local matter that I can handle discreetly. But if you keep insisting that there's nothing wrong with your son's charity scam, I'm going to have to refer this to the State Attorney General's office and the FBI. The words FBI had the same effect on Margaret that they'd had on Brandon. She went completely white. The FBI? Wire fraud is a federal crime, Mrs. Whitmore. If your son collected money through electronic means under false pretenses, that's federal jurisdiction. Margaret looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would appear to rescue her from this situation. Surely we can work something out. I mean, nobody's been hurt, and we can make sure all the money goes to legitimate charities. That's a start, I said. But there's still the matter of your son's behavior toward me today. I'm sure he's learned his lesson. Have you learned your lesson, Brandon? I asked, turning to the young man who had been unusually quiet during his mother's confrontation. Yes, sir, Brandon said quietly. I'm really sorry for everything I said and did today. And what exactly are you sorry for? Brandon looked around at his friends, most of whom were now either in their cars or halfway there. I'm sorry for trying to force you off your own property. I'm sorry for making threats about having you arrested. I'm sorry for being disrespectful and entitled. And I'm sorry for the charity thing. I should have made sure all the paperwork was proper before collecting any money. I nodded. That's better. Now, Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to understand something very clearly. This is not HOA business. This is not a civil matter. This is potential criminal activity, and it's exactly the kind of thing that can destroy a young person's future. Margaret's anger was visibly warring with her fear. What do you want from us? I want you to cancel tonight's party. I want Brandon to return all the money he's collected, with a full explanation and apology to everyone who contributed. I want you to stop using your HOA position to harass and intimidate people. And I want both of you to understand that actions have consequences. And if we do all that, then I'll consider this matter closed, and it won't go in any official reports. Margaret looked at Brandon, who nodded eagerly. Fine, we'll cancel the party and return the money. Good. Deputy Rodriguez will be following up to make sure that happens. Is that all? Margaret asked. Not quite, I said. There's one more thing. Margaret Whitmore stood there, still trying to process the fact that her carefully constructed world of HOA authority and social influence had just crumbled around her. But I wasn't quite finished with the lesson yet. Mrs. Whitmore, I said, I want you to understand something very important. Your son didn't just make a mistake today. He demonstrated a pattern of behavior that suggests he believes he's above the law and above basic human decency. Now see here, Margaret started. No, you see here. I interrupted, my voice taking on a stern tone I use with repeat offenders. Your son threatened a citizen with false arrest, attempted to extort someone off their own property, and organized what appears to be a fraudulent charity scheme. In my experience, young people don't just wake up one day and decide to become criminals. They learn these behaviors from somewhere.